think, man, I've got this figured out, it changes. I mean, we have 5 kids, and I thought, man, with each one, it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And it wasn't, because they weren't all the same kind of thing. And so each of those steps, just like a child's first step, can be very challenging. And sometimes they can be really, really as difficult as that very first step. And so what we wanted to do in this session is we want to talk about, it sounds a little yuppie for me, but these seasons of parenting, kind of these time markers of before you're actually parents and as you start out with having children and working through there, because we think there are some unique characteristics, and perhaps we will be able to equip you for the storm that is coming. We don't want to equip you fully. We want you to learn some of those things the way we did, by surprise, because there is a lot about it that is unexpected. And I don't care if you had great parents and you've read great books, you've done all your quote unquote research, you're going to find that these seasons are going to bring things that are unexpected. So let me remind you of this principle before we get started. The good news is that you and your spouse are not responsible fully for parenting your child. And I don't mean youth ministers are supposed to do that. What I mean is God is there working with you, and rely heavily on him. That's what he wants from you. It's what he expects from you, and it's what you need from him to see you through it. So as we talk about seasons, I want to start by just making this. I know we have, I think most everybody here are parents or going to be parents. But sometimes when we talk about marriages and we talk about parents, we leave behind those who are singles, who maybe want to be married, or we leave behind individuals or couples who want to have children. And we talk about all the blessings of marriages and all the blessings of parenting, and we leave behind some people. And I just want to say it this way, is God loves single people, and God loves people who don't have children. And there are some great ways that you can serve the King in ways that even Tami and I now can't, because of age or life condition. And I will just tell you, our opportunities with 5 kids were really limited as to perhaps to a couple. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to have kids. I'm not saying you shouldn't want to have kids, but there are some great things that you can do and great things that God can do through you. So enjoy that quiet time. I mean, I'm just telling you, we started with a baby from day one. Tami and I are currently on our honeymoon. That's why we are always smiling. We're having a great time, and she still goes like this a little bit, you know. But I don't want this to seem like parenting is where it's all at, and if you don't have kids, that you're really gonna be a disappointment to God and everybody else.
But since the topic is parenting.
Since that is parenting, and most of you say, now you tell us that we could have had great success without all these little urchins, we'll move on. So let's start with this. Parenting begins before your parents. I don't mean that the things that you've learned from your parents or things that you've experienced as a kid. I always tell my kids, I said, I can tell you how to be a teenager. I once was one. They just don't believe that. But there is a place, and if you have an opportunity to encourage young couples who don't yet have children, let me just say this. It is really important to have a conversation specifically about parenting. When Tami and I got married, I had a philosophy of parenting that was based almost exclusively on the good, and I did, good godly parents that I had. And Tami's method of parenting was based heavily on what she had experienced in a good godly home. The thing is that the two parenting styles had some differences in it. And so we hadn't had any kind of a conversation. Of course we did, because we had a baby when we were dating. So you've got to talk about parenting, you know. But we may not had enough conversation about how are we going to approach this thing. and in a world where people are not always marrying a spouse that had even religious influence or any good parenting, so they don't know, they don't bring anything to it. Questions, that kind of a conversation. We would encourage the same thing with married couples about marriage. But the things that seem to be, well, it's obvious that's what we'll do. The number of kids. Are we going to spank? What's our objective for them? Are we going to raise them spiritually? Those are really important to ask. It also is important to kind of think a little bit about looking beyond our own experience. I can just tell you that being a kid with great parents didn't automatically equip me to be a great parent. Just because I lived in a house. For example, my parents had conversations that I never was part of. And now Tammy and I, we would talk a little bit in our parenting seminars about it's okay to have maybe a discussion, even an argument in front of your kids for them to learn the proper tactics. As our friends Trey and Lee say, you need to learn how to fight fair on those things. But they're not going to be privy to all that. I don't. My friend John's here, so I think I'm picking on him about this, and he only knows why I'm picking on him. Nobody else does, so I shouldn't have even mentioned it. But at Christmas time, my dad and mom always had waiting for me in those packages lots of the things that I asked late in our marriage or in our parenting. And so it's really important for us to try to do all that we can to ask those questions. Say, tell me what it was like. And so Tammy and I now are trying to leverage that in such a way as to help younger couples be prepared for what's coming, not because of what we did, but because of what we experienced. Let's see, one other thing.
I actually think, even though you are prepared, sometimes when you think you're prepared for everything, I ran into a young couple, they've just had their first baby. I ran into him in the foyer. And I said, how is it going? He's holding that beautiful little baby girl. And I said, well, how's it going?
And Ray's about,
Yeah,
what,
this big
6'4"
man.
and 250, yeah.
And I said, how's it going? He goes, well, I knew we were going to be tired, but I didn't anticipate this amount of exhaustion. I didn't know that was what was coming. And he said, and it's not just lack of sleep. It's every noise she makes, and it's when she rolls over, should she be rolling over? And all of those things exhaust you because you're so concerned about it. And he said, we thought we were ready, so not to scare you if you haven't had children yet, but even when you are prepared, it is overwhelming. Everything is a first step. It's all new.
Yeah. Just give you an illustration, another illustration. Sugar that's in that setting on his teeth. And so from about the age of 4 till he was losing his baby teeth, he had 2 silver front teeth because his 2 front teeth basically had rotted away from this sugar. And I should have known when he started whistling all the time that it was, no, but we didn't think about it. We just stuck a bottle in. He held the bottle. He went right to sleep. It wasn't even a full bottle. Well, those were unexpected things. And
And if you've been there, it's that where you put honey or jelly on the pacifier. Please take it. Please take it.
Yeah. We didn't do that, as far as you know. So, but let me just add this, because we talk a lot in these about here's the difficulties, here's the challenges. I'm going to tell you, I initially hated when my babies were infants because they couldn't talk, they couldn't help themselves. I was like, tell me what you want. I mean, you want a bottle? Do you want to go to bed? Do you want a cigarette? I mean, I'm just telling you, if they could have spoke to me, I would have done anything. They couldn't walk. They were fully dependent upon us for everything. They woke at the most inconvenient times. They slept when it was the most inconvenient times. They messed when it was always the most inconvenient time. But I will tell you this, especially for those of you who have littles, cherish this time. Put it into your photographic memory, stare at it, just let that baby cry and just relish it, because it will go by far quicker than you think. And before long, they will be teenagers.
Let's not skip there.
Okay, yeah, but the point is, and I'm serious about this, take some time to hold your babies. Take some time to just laugh at your babies. Take some time to lay in the floor and with them next to you and just say, I don't know what tomorrow is. Enjoy that time because they really are precious. And I will just tell you, and every parent told me the same thing, it'll go by so quick. It does. Before long, you blink and you're an old man.
And in this
or an old woman.
This first
or a not as old woman. Oh boy, I'm in big trouble now. Okay.
In that first stage, as you're having infants, you create grandparents. So that's a season of your life that you learn to deal with the grandparents. You need to be patient with grandparents. I'm not just saying that because I am a grandparent, but you need to be patient with them. This is new for them. They are now part of your family in a way that they're trying to figure out what that looks like for them. They love you. They love your baby. So they're looking at trying to figure out their role. Find ways to communicate with your grandparents. Let them know, especially if you're the in-law of the situation. Make sure you're communicating. Keep them involved. Let them be a part of your lives. I understand something's blowing up somewhere, but I understand.
It's still far away. Robert, count between the bomb and the explosion. Yeah.
I understand sometimes if you don't believe, or maybe they aren't a good influence on your children. I hear stories all the time. We can't.
With your kids, when they become older, going, you can't come back home. You have 3 kids and you're going to have to get a job. I mean, those boundaries are good.
And I would suggest you be careful how you talk around your children. Now we're talking infant stage, so that doesn't matter. But be careful how you talk around your children about extended family as well, because you want them to respect them and love them. My mom had a stepmom, and that situation wasn't good, but it was the only grandma I knew. And I didn't know how to relate to the grandma relationship that my mom had with this stepmother. It was just really awkward for me because my mom was very vocal. It was kind of a sad story in there. But your kids pick up on those things, and you want to teach your children to respect other people and to understand that. But,
so, about the time that you think I've got this figured out, right? Okay, we're getting them to take their first steps. They're saying their first words. They move from that precious, cooing, swaddled little thing into the terrible twos, which, by the way, the terrible twos do not last a year. They last about 40. But they start practicing very soon as they move into those preschool years.
It's the preschool years, and I have several things I just want to share with you about the preschool years. It is the most influential phase of their life. They are changing so much. They're learning everything in those preschool years. So make sure you are on top of that. I shared yesterday about my daughter was letting my granddaughter watch these videos on YouTube, and she was speaking Japanese. So make sure you're watching that as real littles. Make sure you're doing that. And in this phase of parenting, you need to make sure somehow you figure out how to let your spouse know that even though this dependent child needs me, you still come first. You still come first. It's really easy to get caught up into that situation, the mommy or maybe even the daddy, where that child gets all of the attention and the spouse gets neglected. That's not a healthy situation either.
Here's how Tami handled it. When our babies were still nursing, Tami would wake me up in the night to go get them and bring them back to the bed for her to nurse. And I said, hey, you should be the one getting up. One of us ought to get a night's sleep. And then the next night she'd go, honey, I love you. I said, I love you too. You go get the baby. So she tried to keep that relationship. But it is important because it's easy to become mommy and not wife. It's easy to become daddy and not husband. And I will just tell you, eventually those kids leave, and you really are going to want to be living with, at least for a while, your wife until your grandkids' grandma comes along, and then she's grandma again. But there's a good time in there.
And it's also a time figuring out how to, I have young moms come to me often and go, I can't get him to help me. He doesn't understand what kind of help I need from him in this situation when they're infants and when they're preschoolers. He doesn't understand. And I'm like, have you talked to him about it? Well, no. And I'm like, you need to talk to him about it, because remember, coming from two different backgrounds, this is all new for both of you, not just you and not just him.
And background can be female background, male background.
Right. So making sure you're communicating and not putting your expectations off on the other parent, that's unfair. That's really unfair. You need to make sure you're communicating, and especially communicating at a time where you're not mad and you're probably not going to find a time when you're not exhausted, but when you're not mad. So finding a way to figure it out. Thanks for the yawn. That was perfect.
That's good timing.
It was perfect. Okay. And then I had young moms when we were in Colorado. We were in a congregation that we had several older moms, like 5 of them all at once had their first child in their early 40s. And we decided, okay, we need to start a nursery class for them. And we were going to start it when the kids were about 9 months old, I think, 9 to 12 months old, right in there. And the mamas were telling us, no, why would I send my baby to Bible class? That seems ridiculous. Why would I be doing that? And your baby at that point can start soaking up these things. And I know those little nursery classes seem repetitive and they don't seem necessary. But when you hear that little baby say the word Bible, and you start hearing those things, those infants, those little toddlers are soaking it up already. They're learning how to walk and how to talk. Now we start teaching them about Jesus. We start having them there. So that is important. Have them in Bible class. That is an important thing. This is a time where you start teaching them how to respect others. I stood in the foyer with a young mom at one point, and her little boy was about 9, 10 months old, and he sat there as she was holding him, and he sat there and was slapping her and telling her
Out of anger, not just
he was mad.
playful.
He wanted out, wanted down and out, and he was telling her no, and she just ignored him and went on. And I loved her, and she knew that. I didn't just walk up out of nowhere, a stranger, and tell her what a bad job she was doing. That's not what I was doing, and I didn't do it to spank her and tell her that she was making a mistake. But I said, you may not want to let him do that. She says, but he's so little, he doesn't understand. And I went, but you need to teach him to understand. You need to teach him to understand that that's not okay. We don't treat other people that way. We start bending their spirit right off the bat. And if you do it while they're in that toddler preschool stage, it's easier to do it then than it is to try to fix it when you get on down the road. So making sure you're shaping them and forming them right from the very beginning, not allowing them to scream at you or talk back to you or tell you no, but understanding they're figuring it out. This is all new, but shaping them and molding them and letting them know that's not okay. That's not okay.
Tami calls it sometimes, it's when you refuse to train your child, they're training you.
They are.
They're beginning to shape you the way they want you to be.
They are. When our kids were little, here we were with these 5 kids, and we'd sit at the back of the auditorium. And I finally had an older woman that I loved come up to me, and she said, how's it going for you back there? Because she would set up.
Like she didn't know. Oh my, it was back there. It was a carnival.
Yes. And she said, I want to give you some advice. I hope you take it well. But she said, I think if you would take your family and if you would move them down to the front of the auditorium and sit, they'll behave better. And I looked at her like she was nuts. And she was, just try it. Just try it a week or two and see what happens. So we took our circus down to.
Yeah, and by the way, I was doing a lot of preaching and teaching at the time, so I know moms can handle it without dad's help, but.
But we did. We marched down to about the 3rd row, and my kids behaved better. They didn't feed off of everything that was going on those back pews. They behaved better. And I was one of those, I wasn't going to let my children train me, but when I took them out, I took them out. I didn't let them play in the foyer. I didn't let them play in the nursery. We corrected whatever was going on, and if they were infants or toddlers, I got them settled and brought them back in. But if you take them out and let them play, well, of course they're gonna act up in services because they want to go play in the nursery. So I would take them out, but I felt like I was running a path in the carpet from that third row to the nursery, third row to the foyer, third row. But I had people encourage me through that journey and tell me, keep it up, Mama, keep it up. And so if that's you, make sure that you're letting, oh man, I'm trying, I'm doing my best here. If we're older, be careful of judging those around you.
Yeah, so say
They're doing their best.
a slight disclaimer is that doesn't mean you won't have some youngers and olders who come up and go, very disruptive.
Yes,
Very
of
disruptive.
course you are.
And it doesn't mean that moving to the third row, it's not a circus. But the nice thing is, everybody got a little more out of the surface because not only did they get the sermon, the singing, they also got the entertainment. So
Yeah.
it was always, they still, but I'm just saying, it doesn't fix it, but we did find that it dramatically improved our kids. Just like it, I would say this to adults, at the back of the auditorium is a terrible place to be very engaged. The closer you are, is the better that is. Well, the same as with those kids as they develop that.
It was really good for them. And another thing that I would suggest to you is find yourself a circle of young families to build a village with. Make sure that you are doing that where you're at. Make sure you're doing the young family thing. For us, it made a huge difference for us as we're raising our kids together. And my children had that influence in their lives. But they understood that church was people. And that's what we want our children to understand, that church is people. And this is a phase, this toddler preschool phase is the time where you start setting that pattern of, we get to go to church. We get to go to church this weekend. And not that, get your stuff picked up, we have to go to church. You're making us late for church. It's, we get to go be with God's people. We get to be gathered. So make sure you're doing that. And also, and I'm gonna throw this in there, and I hope you aren't upset by this, but this baby making noise, I love that. We sat with Tami at lunch the other day, and he said his congregation has all these children, and that it has noise going on. That's the sound of a healthy congregation.
That's right,
And you
absolutely.
need to understand that. Yes, there is an old lady that's gonna be thinking ugly things about you. That's just how it works. That's just how it works. Ignore her. Find the people that love you and surround yourselves with them, and make sure you're doing that.
Yeah. So we get it all worked out, right? We got them. We got to figure it out. They're little sponges. I'm not supposed to let them watch Baby Einstein anymore. They turn into Beethoven, and that's weird. But I don't know what it is now is the latest thing. But they're soaking all this stuff up, and you're going, we got our rhythm. We got the sleeping thing down a little bit, got them working at church, and then they changed the rules. The one thing we prayed for was, Lord, let them go. Let them leave the house. They do. For school, right? And we're thinking, this is great. We can get them off to school and you can have some downtime. No, it doesn't work that way. All these things. Now, our oldest son, Josh, is 43 or will be in December. And I remember when we took Josh to school, to kindergarten. He started in kindergarten. And we're ready for this. We're preparing for this. He got a little backpack and he had a little outfit on. He was ready to go. And the kindergarten was kind of up a hill. You parked down below and kind of walked up this hill. And so here's Josh. And at that time, Josh was the same height as width as depth. He was a little pudgy thing. He's not so much that now. But he starts up this hill and we're like, oh, isn't this cute? Nobody had iPhones back then, so we weren't taking pictures because we couldn't afford to have it developed. They just ended up in a desk drawer somewhere. But they're all up, and he's going up there. We're watching his little legs trudge up there, and we're so happy until he gets to the top of the hill. And he turns, and he does this. and drops his hand and goes on into school. As if to say, farewell, I will be back with cargo from other lands. I mean, he was, and the two of us come apart. How are we going to live without him home until 2? I mean, it was terrible. And by the way, we repeated that exact same action when our second oldest went off to college. So it doesn't change. But all of a sudden, the pattern of our parenting had to change.
And even with homeschooling, if you homeschool your children, the pattern changes because you're now allowing time for schooling and you're having to work around that, and your children are at the age, even with homeschooling, they're going, well, I don't want to do that today. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And you're going, okay, no, this is a part of our lives. This is what we have to do. So.
Yeah, it's that I'm not mocking it. I'm just saying when I was young, I was in public school and my mom said, wait till your dad gets home. And then I found out that with homeschoolers, dad's the principal. Okay, so it was a double problem there. But things begin to change because, as Tami put it, they're going to start, if they haven't already to some degree, but they're going to start testing the boundaries. You've started letting a little of that rope out, right? They're now already at 4, 5, 6, depending kind of when your kids start into preschool or kindergarten or first grade elementary, that you're giving them some leash, right? You're giving them some room. They're going to start interacting with the world far bigger than they have the previous half a dozen years, because you have controlled most of that environment up to this point. Now, you, though you think you're a good parent, have a whole lot less control with who they interact with, who is influencing them, even what they're doing in those days. And that means, guess what? More intentionality as being a parent. You're going to have to, I don't want to say counter, because everything they experience isn't bad, but you're going to have to be very intentional about engaging. And one of the things that's going to change is that about that time or shortly before there, by the time they're getting close to school age, often siblings come along. In other words, as the oldest child, as my mother's clear favorite, and with all humility, the perfect child that I was, my parents decided to have another child. And it didn't work out so good. It was a sister. And then they did it again. It was a brother. I said, you guys just stop. I mean, you see it's going the wrong direction here. But in all seriousness, all of a sudden, there are these kids who are vying for attention. There's a mom who has one that is not yet in school, maybe even still an infant, and another one who's going off. And it's this sibling rivalry that goes along. And it manifests itself in a variety of ways. We talk about birth order, and I think there is some credibility to that. That, you know, as you have more kids, the ones that are already, you're like, I'm exhausted by time number 5 comes along. I don't care what you want to do, what you want to be. It's not completely that way, but they start going through this. And Tami, I remember, man, our kids, our boys, because they were boys, I mean, they really could literally be to the point of fist fighting, and a half hour later, they were playing together. It was just that kind of rite of passage. But when they got in altercations, it was not enough. In fact, I want to look here real quick, make sure that nobody's involved in the story I'm getting ready to tell, because I saw something out here in the foyer earlier. Oh no, it's a good thing. There were 3 young men, and it looked like it was a couple of young men from the kids program and maybe somebody who had been helping to supervise that. And I obviously don't know the backstories from having to piece it together, but it looked as if these two had gotten crossways with one another at some point during the day or during the kids' time. I don't know, but the other one was saying, all right, I need you to apologize to him, and I need you to apologize to him. And he says, now I need you to shake hands because you're friends. You've put this aside. And they went on. And I thought that's really kind of what Tami used to do, only Tami did it the worst way, at least for them. All right, now hug. And I'm not so sure if they were ever sorry and intended not to do it again because it was hurtful, or they just didn't want to hug their sibling, and it deterred them. But it's a matter of realizing that all of a sudden, you know the expression spinning plates? There used to be performers that had these long rods, and they would start the rod and they would spin a plate on it, and about the time that this one would slow down, it would start to wobble, and he'd have to go spin it, and that's what it becomes. All of a sudden, you're spinning plates to get kids to school and home from school and meals and shopping. But now there's the time constraint because they got to be there at 7:45. You got to get it picked up at 12:30 or at 2:45. And by the way, there's another baby and its feeding schedule, and you start spinning those plates. And so it begins to just change the dynamic of it. And you have to be adaptable in that.
I'm hearing from homeschooling mothers too, as their older children, they start schooling with their older children, the younger children are feeling left out. And so it's finding a way to include them and not make them feel like this child is now special, because it does make the younger children feel like
because they see school as something special, right?
Right.
Oh, you get to go to school, you get books, you get time with mommy or daddy, or you're getting that.
And some of the time you can do your homeschooling while the baby may be napping, but it doesn't work that way as they become toddlers. So finding a way to communicate with that about, well, she's older, or here's your color, here's your special coloring sheet that you get to do, but finding that out, but understanding it's just a shift in things as the school age hits. It's just a shift in that part of life.
And so there is something that you need to begin at this stage to understand, and it has to do with your calendar. And that is the fact that now all of a sudden, what once was, we have the majority control over our calendar. We have the bedtime and the get up time and the breakfast time and the lunch time. And for the most part, baby can upset that, but we're controlling that time. To now there's school, now there's friends, now there's all these things. And this is when the calendar begins to overload. We're going to talk more about it a little bit later, but I will just tell you that when you become a parent, you will not be able to continue to do everything you once did. Something's got to give. And to think that you're still going to be able to have golf outings and girlfriend vacations and this hobby and that this, and that parenting is just going to find its way into all the cracks and crevices, it is a misunderstanding of this new full-time job that you have as a parent.
Yeah, this is the phase of life where my alone time was in the bathroom. It was like, just lock the door. You cannot come in
I
here.
kept coming and asking her, "Are you sick?"
Just leave me alone.
No, I'm fine. She still does that a lot. And in fact, I think we're just Tami and I, we moved from a 2,700 square foot house in Colorado to a 1,400 square foot house. We moved to California, and then to a 1,300 square foot house in Oklahoma. And I kind of liked it. I was like, man, I don't have as big a yard. I don't have as much stuff to manage and store, even though I'm a stuff guy. And I told her, I said, we saw a movie and they lived in like a one-room studio apartment. There's like a little kitchenette, and there was the bedroom, and here was a little seating area. There was a little isolated bathroom. I said, I think I could live like that. And she goes, I would need more space. Right? So there is that time to realize that mommy needs some space, but all of a sudden, it's like digging a hole in the sand. You dig a hole and it just gets filled in with new stuff. And so it presents challenges. And I always say it from a daddy perspective, you're probably ignorant of what's transpiring. Especially if you're in a traditional relationship or a traditional family where mom's at home and you go off to work, you come back, you drop your briefcase and go, how's all my kids? And she's going, near death. Near death. All right? So my warning or my instruction or my encouragement to dads is you need to be overly sensitive to the fact that she may need some space. And even if mom's going to work and dad's going to work, you guys need to recognize that you're consenting adults. Remember we talked about this? this is your mess together, not her mess, not my mess, and they need to be working. Let me just throw in one thing, and we're going to build on this one too, but I think it's important. Tammy mentioned it, it needs repeating, is one of the ways that God provides his support is by his people that surround you. Community is important. The reason that I think church community is important is because it's a community of people that share the same value. You can have friends in the neighborhood, can have friends in your school, but friends within the church share the same values. I remember one time somebody brought one of our kids to Tami and went like this and said, I just whipped them.
And I went, okay, what do you do?
Yeah. Now, we didn't advocate that, but the point was they knew our values and probably reacted a little bit to it. But the reason we're comfortable is because we knew who they were and they weren't abusive. That same individual, I think, when we would go camping as a large group, would always we'd always say, kids, stay away from the fire, which in their mind sounds like what? Don't forget to play with the fire, you know? And so our kids would get close to the fire, and they want to put sticks in. We go away from the fire, and our daughter Leslie got up on the rocks around the fire and lost her balance and fell face first into the fire. And the same guy grabbed her by the back of her coat and just before she had pulled it out. The point was what? He had the same value. His whipping was not because he was angry. It was, I am here to be part of that. And so that's a great thing to have. And if you try to do it alone, good luck. I mean, I'm just saying, good luck. So that's what starts to happen as they move into that so-called school age, the school days.
Yeah, it was actually during that stage and in the teen years, in the school days, where we made our home where the kids could have their friends. They could have them from church, they could have them from school, but if they were in my yard, in my house, I knew what was happening. And it was we made our house the central point, even for our church friends. Every Sunday night, we'd have people over from church, and it would be the young families, and we'd gather in our little 700 square foot house with 30, 40 people, because we wanted our family surrounded by God's people. So making your home the center of the social aspect
where
of
everybody
your family,
wants to be, right? We
yes.
want everybody wanted to be there. That's where the kids wanted to bring their friends.
Yes, it was where the kids were. The neighborhood kids would be, in fact, and I don't know if I've shared this yet, but I'm gonna share it again if I have. It was where the kids would gather, and one year at VBS, I had to borrow the church van to bring all the friends to church because they knew us.
You ever see one of those cartoons? You ever
us.
see the cartoon? I'm not exaggerating. You know the cartoon of the bus with the kids hanging out of it, and there's like dogs and cats running behind it? That was Tami wheeling into the church parking lot with the church bus, and I mean there are kids everywhere. I bet you there were 3,000 kids in that bus. That's right. Pentecost was nothing compared to this. I mean, there was more screaming, yelling, and tongue speaking in this group than there ever was on Pentecost. Okay, I care. But let me say something because it reminded me of this. Is that I said that about your life begins to change. There was a reason why our house became the center point for our friends. Because they were all still without kids, most of them, and they wanted to go out to eat. And we were a family of 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids.
Even if we could afford it, it wasn't fun.
I mean, I remember we went out at lunch on a Sunday, and this would have been mid-90s, and the bill came and it was $90 for Sunday lunch. And I said, we can't do, and it wasn't because we were in someplace fancy. But guess what? Our financial situation changed. We couldn't do what we now can do. In fact, our kids go, why are you doing all these things now? And I go, because we don't have to pay for you anymore. But you need to realize that, guess what? That means that maybe the monies that used to buy the new guitar, may buy the new camera equipment, may buy the new truck, may buy the new whatever, those monies are going somewhere else now. And it's like with anything. That pie is only so big, no matter how thin you slice it, it doesn't make it any bigger of a pie, and you have to make those adjustments. And that's part of the reason that we had to adjust with our family. I didn't particularly like it. People showed up at our house, I'm like, pizza from Little Caesars. What?
And we started doing it by bring your food, go get your food, bring whatever you want, and just come to our house and hang. Let's do that. And it just grew. But making your home the center of your social circle, that strengthens your children. You can watch and don't assume just because your children are going to another Christian's home that the behavior in that home is the behavior that you want in your home. So if you have them my kids got to go to other people's houses some, but when I knew their children.
But they wanted to be in our, and I will say, it did backfire. But Tammy and I, after 33 years of marriage, moved from Colorado to California. Our youngest son called, and I'm going to try to paraphrase, "How are you out of your ever-loving mind?" is what he said. I think you guys are going through some kind of midlife crisis. What do you mean you're moving from Colorado? And this is what he said: "Where do we come for Christmas?" And I said, "Well, to our house." And he goes, "That's not home." But the point was, he had become so used to that was the central place. He lived in Oklahoma, but he saw that home, though we had moved, but it was where we were. This is where we came together, our friends. And by the way, they were known for it. In college, we got a phone call after Wednesday night church, and it was my son Daniel, and he said, "Hey, Dad, what are you up to?" I said, "Just walked in from church." I said, "What are you up to?" He says, "I'm standing on your front porch. We've come for a extended holiday from college." Well, the we was 30 college students who had caravanned to our house to stay. Now, I will tell you that from that, we have young men and young women who have grown up to be school teachers, preachers, missionaries, and I like to think that we had something to do with that by making our home, and I don't mean that pridefully, but making our home Grand Central Station with all that comes with it.
I know you wanted to jump over the teen years.
No, boy, did I want to jump over the teen years.
As your kids, and I'm finding that children are shifting hormonally younger and younger all the time. One of my sons said their daughter has turned 8, and they're having all these issues with her. And he's looking at me and he's going, "Is 8 a thing?" And I went, "I don't remember 8 being a thing." And then I started talking to other mothers, and they're going, "Yeah, my 8-year-old is acting like a teenager." I'm like, what is going on? But it's those years where hormones or whatever start kicking in. And what I want to encourage you is to keep in mind, I know it's new for you, and I know it can be confusing to you because your little darling now has turned into a drama queen or whatever. Keep in mind, they're confused. As they're going into this, it's new for them. Whatever changes may be taking place as they're heading into those teen years, that's all new for them.
Yeah, and it's probably newer than it was for you. And the reason why is we're finding earlier physical development. I mean, young girls that are entering into those first steps of womanhood much early, by 3, 4, even 5 years. But psychologically, that is not tracking the same way. So in other words, you're giving a little girl big girl feelings, and those things are really, so it's even more difficult maybe it was than for most of you, and certainly more than it was for us as we made that transition.
Yes, and when we talk about the teen years, we've mentioned a couple of our kids. Our kids were good kids, and I'm not patting us on the back. We were just blessed with good kids, but they were strong. They were very strong kids, and so it became a time of life that they're becoming, they thought they were adults, and they start thinking that way, but trying to help them learn to control some of those feelings that they're having, and dealing with those is so important. But having that communication open as teenagers, and you all have been there, it may have been who you were when your parents were, you would come in from a youth activity or whatever, and your parents would go, "Oh, how was it?" "Fine." "What'd you do?" "Nothing." And they don't share anything with you. They go spend a day with their friends, and they're gone all day, and it's a wonderful day, and they come home and you say, "How was it?" Like, I can't get you to talk. Well, I discovered that if I took one at a time and I got them in the car, and it was like,
up and get, no, that wasn't
No,
true.
it was like, let's run to the store. Let's run here. Would you go with me here? Kind of thing. They would open up and they would talk more with me because it was more of a one-on-one situation. But making sure you're finding a way to communicate with them at a time where they may be so over my constant talk daughter started becoming more quiet because she was confused. She didn't know how, if in fact she had 4 older brothers picking on her all the time. And so I had to tell her, no, what you're feeling is normal. What you're going through is okay. You're beautiful. Quit listening to the world. Oh, there one went that ring. Quit listening to the world. Make sure that you focused on Jesus. And if we tend to, as teens, become very self-focused, very self-focused. So making sure you help them realize in that time frame, it's not just about them, helping them through that.
Yeah, and I have a really good friend, and he's probably, as far as I know, he has done the best job of exemplifying what he preaches and teaches about parenting. And part of his has been always to have, no matter how many kids you have, to have some time where you deal not in only in conflict or in correction, but when you deal with the kids and have some time one-on-one with them. And with us having 5, obviously, and you split the waking hours by 5 and throw in everything else, there wasn't very much. It probably was a little bit of a failure, but if you can have those times to go, let's just for a minute. It doesn't have to be a grand trip. It doesn't have to be a cruise. It doesn't have to be a safari, but it does some time to go, hey, let's go for the afternoon. Let's go for ice cream. Let's go for a drive and have more of those conversations.
A couple other things under teenagers. I know our time is coming to a close here. This is a time that you may have to start drawing some hard lines from them. Remember, they're not as mature as they think they are. And so you're going to have to draw some hard lines, give them some boundaries in there, but talk to them about it. We talked about that yesterday in discipline. Make sure you've communicated what those boundaries are. In fact, get their input on, okay, we're needing to put boundaries here. And one of ours was with our kids' friends. One of our sons had a friend that was in his life. He'd met him through school. The boy had a broken home. It was sad. His life was sad. And so Josh had gone to this boy's house a few times, and I finally went, I'm not liking what I'm seeing here. You can't go there anymore. But he can come here. He can come to our house. That's okay. And then he wasn't respectful, and it wasn't good. I could just see the influence on my son was not good, and I finally said, I don't want you to have anything to do with it anymore. You don't have to be ugly.
And of course he said, thank you, Mom, for watching out for me. I appreciate it all along.
Horrible. It was horrible. He thought we were awful, awful people, and I said, you don't have to be ugly to him, but he's not going to be entwined in our lives anymore. Well, we went away for Thanksgiving, and while we were gone at Thanksgiving, someone broke into our home. And then they called and left a message on our answering machine, and it was this boy. And he had broken into our home, and he was ugly, and anyway, and Josh kind of stepped back and went, you were right. You were right. I didn't know that's who he was. And so you have to make some boundaries for them. They're not mature enough to make some of those boundaries.
Yeah, but let me add this too, and this is really hard. It was for me. I am a helicopter parent is not, those are weaklings, okay? I was overbearing at times. You also are going to have to give them some room.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to let them test the waters. My dad said that his mom told him, you will not be able to go to the swimming pool until you learn how to swim. And sometimes we do that with our kids. You're going to have to get in the water with those boundaries, but you're going to have to say, I'm going to have to let them have a little more rope than I did before. I'm going to have to let them make some, by the way,
Give them choices.
Maybe even a choice that they make, right or wrong, and the wrong isn't a deadly one, but it's going to have a consequence, right? You may say, okay, I'll tell you what, you want to stay up all night? I'm going to give you that choice. But guess what? 6 o'clock comes early in the morning. You're gonna get up, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna do what you need to. And it may take a couple of those when they go, I really would like to go to bed a little bit earlier. They probably will start with, could I just not go to school tomorrow? But in other words, lay those choices, and I've heard more than one individuals who I really respect say, you're gonna have to let them make some of those choices. That's the only way that you can correct what the choices that they make and help them to make better choices in the future.
There may be better books out there now because it's been a while since I was a parent of teenagers. But in the day, Klein and Fay are books written by two guys, Klein and Fay, that they wrote books on making choices. And it's Love and Logic, or I think that they're actually excellent. And it helped me as I was helping my children learn how to make good choices. The other thing, one more thing here with teenagers is, and actually kids at all ages, don't fight over everything. You know, as teenagers, they're wanting to express themselves a little bit. They may want to cut their hair in some weird way or dye their hair in some weird way, and that's not sinful. You know, let them make some choices. Don't fight them over everything. And you'll have pictures later to show them and go, remember this choice you made? So, but you don't have to fight over everything. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. So you get into this, and as I said, as a father, I felt my job was to see that nobody died, and that was tested during the teen years because I really thought somebody was going to see Jesus, making their conversion even more important because it could happen anytime, any day. But like Tami said, we were pretty fortunate. Nobody went to the grave and nobody went to jail. And a preacher that preached where John and I grew up together in Colorado, Don Cantor, he came up to me and he said, you're going to love the day that your kids are gone. And I went, no. I said, for all the trouble that they've been, we're our own party. We are the Roberts clan. We like it. It's a circus, but it's our circus, and these are our monkeys. I just can't imagine the day that when they leave, that it's going to be a great day. How are we going to ever continue without that? Well, I will tell you that when they first left, it was tragic. Whether it was college or a wedding or just moving to a house with friends across town, it was tough to have no mess in the mudroom, to have beds that were and there is especially for a mama who stayed home with her kids, there was an enormous vacuum. And I was fortunate enough to know that it was my job to help fill that vacuum because we were partners.
You should have heard the noise he made after that.
You know, but the point was, we were supposed to be partners through all of this, and that's why it's so important, because empty nest will come. Now, here's a word of encouragement or discouragement. You take it. They're never gone for long. They'll return. They'll return sometimes, as our oldest did, and he came back after living with some friends, decided that wasn't going to work out, wanted to come back home. That's great. But you know what I had to say? There are some rules for this while you're here. Now, they changed. They weren't, you have a curfew, but it was this. Because at the time he was 22, I said, here's the deal. I have to know when you intend to come back home. Because when you were living out and running all over, your mom wasn't having trouble going to sleep, not knowing where you were, but she will now. And you'll extend the courtesy to her to say, I intend to be in by 2 o'clock in the morning. Great. We went to sleep. And if it went later than that, guess what? We've got a problem. There were things that you had responsibility for. You don't just drop your laundry off at mom's laundry service anymore. You're 22. You can do your own laundry. And by the way, I didn't charge rent. We didn't make him buy groceries. But you couldn't just eat everything in the house and then go, what have you been doing all day, lady? We had those kind of, then they come back and they'll bring their kids. We could really use some quiet time. Wouldn't you take them? I don't even undo the chain. I just say, nope, we're having our quiet time. No, you'll let them back in because they tease you with those grandkids, but make sure those grandkids get lots of Mountain Dews and Sweet Tarts before they go home. That's a little bit of revenge. But you need to realize that there are some important things. You are going to move down to grandparenting. And now all those things that you loathed, that your parents and your in-laws acted like, you're going to start doing it. And you need to recognize the boundaries that those kids set for your grandkids and for you within that. You can be counsel, but you need to understand it's not your household to run. You need to recognize that you continue to be partners. And I will say this, I love when my kids are around. I love my kids, and probably if they all lived in the same house, we'd find a way to make it work. But there also is this place too in parenting. And this relationship that we have now with our kids not at home didn't start the day they went off to college or the day they got married. It's the work that needs to be done early on. And so it's an encouragement I really want to push, even though you think that parenting is behind you. By the way, parenting is not behind you. My oldest turns 43, and I am still to some degree parenting. I am still concerned about him. I still want to, if he wasn't almost 6 foot and 210 pounds, I'd sometimes like to bend him over my knee and share with him the love of Jesus. Or send him to him. But it is really important that that part of parenting not get lost, and that is that you are partners in that. By no means have we encapsulated everything that takes place in those seasons, because you're changing. Your parenting style is changing. Their circumstances are changing. Their bodies and psyches are changing. And it's always trying to find that perfect balance in that. But hopefully some of these things will help you. In our next session, if you choose to be back, we're going to look at kind of a rapid fire of just some things that we have learned, generally speaking, regarding parenting. And hopefully it'll kind of be a thread that will cinch all these things up at least enough. We'll give you a break. What time do you think this next session start? Oh, wait, I got 4. Did she?
No, there's
One
one more.
more. Yeah. So let's take a quick break here, and then we will.